On the last episode of Garage Noise, I shared with you how I straightened this dent on this Ford Fusion. Today we're going to complete this repair. We've got a few more dents to straighten, and then we're going to paint this entire side. We're going to be blending the color and using a wet bed. So let's dig in, and I'll show you how we do it. The first thing I want to do is to get this primer ready for paint. I am going to use this bodyline tool to mark out the bodyline and use that as a guide for blocking this primer. I'm going to use a piece of 3/4 inch tape to mark off that body line, and then we'll block up to that tape so we don't sand that peak of the body line. To block this, I'm using 320 grit sandpaper on a firm block. We're going to use a cross-hatch pattern to straighten out that primer. Once I have that side blocked, we'll flip it around and do the other side, marking it off and taping it off so we can block up to that tape and give us a nice crisp body line. For right now, I'm going to tape off this jamb so we don't sand inside the jamb and get scratches and then we have to repaint. Now, there is a little bit of an edge where we did some repair where we're going to have to paint, but I'll show you how we address that later on in the video. Since we've taken our time and we've pulled this dent properly, we filled it properly and then blocked it straight before we primed, the primer blocking process is not that difficult. You do want to keep your eye out for some low or high areas and make sure it's nice and straight. Now I'll carefully do a little bit of finish sanding inside this jamb up against that tape. Another reason why we tape this off so we don't sand outside that primer area. Now we have the primer all blocked straight with the 320 grit. We're going to remove the tape. We're going to clean it with some water-based cleaner. This is just some window cleaner that has no ammonia. We're going to wash it clean, and then we'll block over it quickly with some 600 grit sandpaper to refine those scratches before we paint. Anytime I'm sanding or doing my finish sanding, I'm looking for any imperfections that might show up in my paint, any pinholes, any deep scratches, and take care of those before you get your paint on. Now I'm going to go ahead and reinstall the used door we purchased for this vehicle. This door does have a couple dents in it that we're going to have to address. So we're going to wash this, make sure it's nice and clean, free from contaminants before we start sanding. So there's one dent there, and then there's another shallow dent right in the center. And then down on the bottom, there's a little bit of a larger dent we're going to fix before we get this painted. This dent has a little bit of a crown that we're going to use the shrinking slapper to tap down that crown and get it back into shape before we grind this to bare metal and pull it out. I just want to take a little bit of pressure off that crown and release that, and hopefully that dent will go a little bit back into shape before we fill it. So I like to prep out my panel before I start doing my body work, so I'm going to use some 600 grit sandpaper on the orbital sander and machine sand this all smooth and get it ready for paint. Now, you don't have to do this first. You can do this after you do your body repair, but I just like to get it all prepped out and ready. This also forces me to take a good look at this panel and make sure there's no chips or nicks or anything that I have to repair before we paint. Now that we have this sanded with 600 and cleaned, we're going to go ahead and take the angle grinder with some 36 grit roll-lock disc, and I'm going to grind this down to bare metal. I'm grinding about 1 inch to 2 inches around that dent, so it's a little bit of a larger area. And then I'm going to go around and machine sand the edge and feather that back with some 180 grit sandpaper. And this is going to help with the transition from the repair into the old paint. If you want to know more about how to feather edge paint, I'll leave a video link at the end. Now I'm going to go ahead and prepare the other dents for filler. This is the dent that's right on the body line of this door. We're going to grind this down, and then I'm going to use the G90E. We're going to pull out the center of the dent, knock down the crowns, and if you want a more detailed video on how to remove these dents, check out the last video I did on this vehicle, and that'll show you everything you need to know. Again, we're going to feather edge out the paint and get it ready for filling. Now I'm going to clean this area with some wax and grease remover. This is a solvent-based cleaner that's going to remove any contaminants that are on the paint. And if you're interested in any of the products or tools I use, check out my storefront. The link is in the description. Now we're going to use a thin coat of filler to fill these low areas and dents. And the filler I'm using today is Rage Ultra. Press in your first coat of filler with some medium pressure. This will help eliminate any pinholes or air pockets that are in that filler. After we laid the filler, I'm going to go ahead and take my orbital sander. I'm going to use some 180 grit sandpaper, and I'm going to just block over this, kind of like in an X pattern, kind of using it as a block to straighten this out. This is just the preliminary sanding to knock down the body filler and get it smooth, and then we can actually use a block to get it straight. Now I'm going to run over with some 320 grit sandpaper. This will help remove those 180 grit scratches and start refining those down to where we can paint over them. If you noticed I haven't sanded the dent on the lower portion of the door, that's because I need to use this cylindrical block to block that out. It's on a contour and I can't get my DA in there, so I'm using this block to form in that contour to block that straight. So it's always nice to have a variety of different size and shape blocks for different applications. I went ahead and applied a thin coat of icing over these repair areas, and we're going to block these out with a flat block, some 320 grit sandpaper, and we're going to block it in an X or crosshatch pattern. That'll help get it straight. The reason we're using 320 is we want to keep these scratches to a minimum. Now I'm going to go over it with 600 and finish getting this ready for some primer. Now I'm going to mask this off for some primer, and I want to avoid getting a hard edge of primer. Those are sometimes difficult to sand out, and they could show up underneath your paint. So I'm rolling the edge of my paper. I am using the 3M Performance gun. I'm using the Roberlo ME1 primer. This is a direct-to-metal primer that blocks very easy. Then we'll go over and block it with some 320 and smooth it out and run over it with the DA and some 600. Now I'm going to take a little time and prep out the shop. I did blow out the vehicle very well. You want to make sure you're blowing out all the jams, all the areas where dust and dirt could hide and come out in your paint. I did wet down the floor and sweep it up. I am spraying in an open garage, so I don't have a paint booth. So all these things help eliminate dust or contaminants. So I did discover a couple little chips in my blending panels. So that's on the front door, and we're going to blend into that. So there's no sense in just painting over a nick or chip. I went ahead and filled it with some spot putty. And then we're cleaning the entire vehicle, and we're going to start masking it off. Before you start taping, it's a good idea to chemically clean any jams that you're going to be taping to, because a lot of oil and contaminants build up inside those jams and it makes it hard to tape to. So clean those real well with some prep solvent. And then you want to mask off your jams first. So do all the jams first. I'm doing foam tape inside the door edge there. Now I'm leaving a little area where I can blow some paint in that edge and cover up that primer that's right on the edge of that jam. And then I'm taping up the seal on the top of the doors, and I'm going to run some foam tape right along that roof edge. And that'll give us a nice soft edge for our clear coat. So there's no latch and handle in this replacement door, so we're taping it down so it doesn't open up during the painting process. We want it to be tight up against that foam in that door. And here is a good look at the roof edge. I taped down the seal, and then I ran foam tape inside that door so we have a nice soft edge of clear. So now we have the perimeter of this vehicle all taped up. I'm going to use my foam tape and fill these holes. We kind of just roll them up and put them in there, and that'll keep overspray from blowing in the door and inside that car. Now I'm going to sand down those chips we filled with the spot putty. We'll tape up the wheel opening and the rear bumper, and then continue masking off this vehicle. This vehicle is ready for some paint. So let's get into the painting process. Now I am not going to use a sealer on this particular vehicle. There's reason for that. Spraying in an open garage, a sealer does not always work out well in those situations. So what I prefer to do is use a wet bed, A wet bed is basically straight binder that you reduce like paint, and what it does is creates a good base that will fill any minor little scratches, and it helps those metallics to lay down smooth and uniform. I've got my wet bed all mixed up, and I'm using a little bit of air and a tack rag to clean off these panels before we spray this wet bed. Now we'll just lay down one good medium coat of wet bed over the entire repair areas, anywhere we're blending or anywhere we're painting. We're spraying this just like paint. I am using the 3M gun with a 1.2 tip. I've been using the 1.2 tip for pretty much everything, base, clear. The only thing I use a little bit bigger tip, a 1.3 for primers. But you want to spray it just like paint. You want to overlap 70%. You want to have consistent passes. You want to be 4 to 5 inches away from the panel. My air pressure is set at 20 psi. I have my volume turned 3 turns out, and the fan pattern is nearly wide open, about a quarter of a turn back. Depending on what gun you're using, your settings could be different, but this is a good guideline to start with, and then adjust from there. Our wet bed is done. Now we need to switch over to paint. I already have my paint mixed up. We're just going to do a quick switch here. There's no need to clean the tip on this gun because, after all, wet bed is just paint with no pigment. So now we want to cover this primer. We're just getting a good base coat on it. We're not trying to bury that primer in paint on the first coat. Don't put your first coat of paint on too heavy. That could cause a chemical reaction and could cause a problem with your paint job. Now I'm not really just putting a coat on the primered areas. I'm putting it over this whole door because this door was actually a different color. I mean, I know it looked really similar, but it was actually a different paint coat and a different color. So I'm covering the whole door. I put my first coat on a little bit too heavy, and it was a little cooler, and this is what happened. We had a little separation in the paint, and it created these fisheyes. Now, it's not a real big issue in your base. You can sand that out, or I opted to put a dust coat on over it, and it smoothed out. But this is what you want to avoid, so be mindful of your volume. You may want to, on your first coat, start that volume just a little bit lighter so you're not dumping too much material on there, because it's really easy to do if you have your volume opened a little bit too much. Put a first coat on, it's a little cooler. That can happen. So you just got to be aware of it and know how to correct it. So learn from my mistakes and you won't have an issue. It is a little bit cooler today, so I did put the infrared lamp on these panels, and I'm heating up these panels, getting ready to clear. I like to warm up the panels a little bit before I clear coat, so this is a pretty handy tool, especially if you're in your home garage doing some work. This would come in handy. It works well on primer as well, so if you're using a 2K urethane primer, it's not curing, as fast as you would like. Put a little heat on it, heat up the panel, then primer it, and then put the heat lamp on afterwards and cure that properly. So nice handy little tool. You can check it out. I got a link in the description. Always check out your base before you start spraying your clear. Make sure everything is covered properly. I'm just using a standard lamp here to check it out. And then I did opt to tack rag this off before I clear. I don't always do that, but in this situation I wanted to make sure it was nice and clean. Now I'm going to finish my blend, and don't overcomplicate your blend. I like to blend 6 to 8 inches into that blend panel, and then I do a drop coat in different directions so those metallics lay in a uniform way. Now it is true that some colors are more difficult to blend, golds and silvers. I do have some videos on blending those colors. You can check them out. I'll leave a link at the end. Now it's time for some clear coat, and this is just like the butter on the pancake. Everybody loves to lay down some clear just like glass, and that's what we're after here. We're going to start off on the bottom of this blend door and work our way up. We're going to be 4 to 6 inches away. I am running an air pressure of 24 psi with this 3M performance gun. I'm using the 1.2 tip. The fan pattern is almost wide open, and I have it dialed back a little bit to 2 turns out on the volume. Because it's a cold day, you want thin, wet coats. A good idea when making your pass is to go past the door edge into the adjacent panel. You want to make sure you're not ending your pass right on that door edge. That's going to create a buildup and could create a run. So when you're spraying your clear, you just want to relax, have a consistent speed, consistent distance, overlap 70%, and you don't have to go super fast. You don't have to, go super slow. Just have a consistent speed. Watch the clear as it's laying down on the panel. Make sure it's laying down how you want it, and if it's not, make some adjustments. So if the clear is going on too heavy, you want to turn your volume down, turn your air pressure up a little bit, and atomize it just a little bit better if you have too much orange peel or something of that nature. Don't get yourself too anxious about painting or clearing. It's not that big a deal. Follow the steps and procedures I've laid out for you. One thing I do want to let you know is make sure you got clean air. If you're doing jobs out of your garage at home, you want to make sure that air has no moisture in it, no oils or contaminants. That would be your biggest issue. So make sure you have clean air. If you have clean air and you follow these steps and procedures, I think you're going to do just fine. If there's something you're struggling with, leave me a comment down below. I will answer. I try to answer all the questions and comments. Also, I've set up an email just for my viewers and subscribers. You can send me photos of your project, ask me questions, and maybe you get featured in a video where I talk about your question and your project. I'm going to finish up this final coat of clear, and then we'll take a good look at the finished product. And if you find these videos helpful or you're a new subscriber, leave me a comment down below. That all helps out the channel, and be sure to like and subscribe. Listen up. It was my pleasure to share this repair video with you. I hope you found it helpful. If you want to help support the channel, check out the links down in the description below. You can also follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Garage Noise 247. We'll see you next time on Garage Noise.